Alright guys, welcome to Startup Grind Melbourne, we're part of the world's largest startup Christmas party at the moment. There's about 20 chapters at the moment, all having their Christmas party on December 12th. It's the first of its kind, so hopefully next year we can somehow network each other's videos and stuff, something cool. But for now it's just we're all on the same date. I see a lot of familiar faces, but I see a lot of new people, so I'm going to cut that music out. Alright, let's get to it. So yeah, Startup Grind originated in San Francisco. It was actually just a bunch of colleagues in their office, and they would, like, if anyone was cool came down to the office, they'd have, like, you know, the guys would stay after work, and then eventually they were telling their friends about it. And I think they've got, like, I don't know, 300, 400 people for their Startup Grind December 12th Christmas party. And yeah, they're holding a big event. So I didn't post that one, by the way, but if any of you guys are in San Francisco in February, we got the big Startup Grind. So we got, anyway, check it out if you're in town. I'm heading across, and I actually used Adioso to book my tickets. That's not a bullshit story, it's true. And just using Tom's software, I managed to get a flight to San Francisco for $1,180 return. So I was rapt about that. Anyway, can everyone give a round of applause for Tom and Adioso? So tonight we're pretty much, if we can go back maybe what your education was, go through your story. Maybe even some failures. We'd like to go through a few failures.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, you called me or emailed me today.
Oh, yes.
Concerned for my well-being.
Okay.
So do we want to?
Yeah. So
start with that.
To give a bit of background, I've been, harassing Tom until he came here. That's the first point. So I got him on Twitter. I don't think he was probably ignoring me the first time around, or something like that. Then I wrote a story about him, and then he's like, "Oh, thank you." And then I, kind of got on his radar. And because I knew you were in San Francisco as well. So San Francisco you at that time?
Actually, I was in Bali when you did that podcast about us.
Yeah, the life of the entrepreneur. So I actually did a story on him, and then tweeted or something like that, and then got on your radar, I think. And anyway, so there was a dialogue that started, and I convinced him to come along. And today Tom sent me a story and said, look, just to give you a bit of background, this is where where my headspace is at, or at least that's what I thought the story was about. And yeah, I was really upset after I read this thing, and I called Tom, and I couldn't get onto his phone. I thought he was near suicidal at this point, and because it was a real down email. I was like, I'm ready to call it quits, and I've had enough of this shit, and it's been 5 years, and I'm just spinning wheels, and yeah, and I thought, oh my god, he's going to come here and have a mental breakdown in front of everyone.
I still might.
Yeah, well, please don't.
It's happened before.
Yeah, so I called, and I was like, I was going to say, look, man, let me help you try and get some money or something. I want a big piece of equity, but we'll get this solved. But thankfully, it was Tom 18 months ago. That's what the post was, and some of the problems that he was facing at that time, and not present day.
It just goes to show how carefully you read the post, because the date is very
there
much
you go.
on there, so. But I can understand that for a 4,500 word post you might skim.
It was intense. And
so I mean, to fill everyone in, some people possibly here, I hope, have may have read two blog posts I wrote about. 6 months ago, they went kind of big on Hacker News, the Y Combinator news board, and around the Australian startup scene. Just really sort of telling the story of some very low times we went through about 18 months ago, which kind of was the time where we'd had our first roll of the dice, I guess, over about the first 2 or 3 years after we got initial incubator seed funding, and then angel funding, and then used that to try and get to a milestone, and realised that we just hadn't made it, and that maybe it was going to be all over. And it turns out that it wasn't at all. Over the last 18 months, we've effectively rebuilt the company from the ground up, and things are going really, really well now. It's sort of what I wanted to do. It's partly just trying to get some attention on our company and our story, but also to sort of share the experience with other people, because I know that I've observed myself as an entrepreneur that's had some Silicon Valley funding and connection, that if you read TechCrunch and Mashable and you hear the good news stories about the companies that are doing well and raising big VC rounds, and all the wins make the headlines, and to anyone who's not doing it so easily, it can be really dispiriting and really demoralising. And it turns out that the people doing it tough is almost everyone, and in fact it includes some of the people who have the big headlines about it. That was actually one of the most interesting things, was that after publishing the first post, I got some emails from people who had some really big headlines, had raised lots of money, and to the outsider you would have thought that they were just crushing it, they were going really well, and they must have been really happy and positive, but they were doing it just as tough as everyone else. So it's been a tough journey for us, tough in unique ways, but equally it's tough for everyone. And I guess I've made a decision in the last year or so to start being very public and open about that, in the hope that other people don't feel so lonely and isolated.
No, well, that's good. I mean, when you go to a website that you loved, or you thought was had a lot of promise, and then you see the sorry letter, we're shutting down, and then you're like, whoa, that helps that you're kind of airing the problems. And
the sad thing about that is, so often the sorry letter, or the we've been acquired letter, which usually means we ran out of money, we couldn't succeed on our own, so we've accepted a fairly low offer.
Oh, I didn't know that was the case. I thought
often,
success story. No.
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. You don't go and take an acquisition if you're on a path to becoming an Airbnb or a Dropbox or a Facebook. So
sure.
It's always a suboptimal decision, and it always happens when you don't feel like you can really achieve huge success on your own.
Sorry, can you guys hear back there too? Is that right? Yeah?
But I think the shame often is that people make that decision to shut up the doors after maybe the first 6 months or even 3 months, when it just about always takes a lot longer than that to find real success. And I think that's a problem with the sort of news coverage that happens in the startup world. There's this idea that the companies that succeed start seeing major signs of success within the first couple of months, or at least the first year, when there are so many, and examples like Pandora, and even Twitter in a way, LinkedIn kind of. So many of the big successes took years and years and years of not really anyone knowing about them before they finally cracked it and made it. So.
Well, I was talking to a lady yesterday. I'm in love with this startup called Clarity FM. I know her name. Her name's Cheryl Yao, but I can't remember the business, so this is not very helpful. But I don't know if you're familiar with Clarity FM, but you basically can call any entrepreneur that's on the list. You got to pay for the privilege, but how else are you going to get access to have a chat with Dave McClure? That's why I love this website. And she was saying, because I was talking about beta users, and the rest of it, she said that, you get if you get something on TechCrunch or whatever, she goes, we'll have 5,000 signups that day, but the next day it's 10.
Exactly.
So it is like, these stages that you got to persistently keep aiming for. But okay, so can we? Do you want to take it back a little bit?
Yeah, totally. So you want my education history?
Yeah, and I know you talk a lot about Fen. Is that right?
Yes.
I don't know. Is that his last name?
That's his first name.
First name. Okay.
Yes.
So
we're hippie parents.
Okay.
Yeah.
How the partnership started there. What are a couple of things you built that were flops or
most things. So my only tertiary qualification is in business with an accounting degree. I started that degree in 1995 which is sort of just around the time when the internet was just starting to emerge. So, when I left high school and started university, there was no option to go and do a degree that was about the internet. I mean, I could have gone and studied IT or computer science, but that seemed incredibly boring compared to accounting, believe it or not. It was completely by accident that I ended up in a business degree. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. The one thing I did know I wanted to do was start companies, and I had the advantage that my father was an entrepreneur, and so I was able to kind of see, just from the way he lived, that you could build a successful career in life just by doing your own thing. And at school we were all told that the best thing you could hope to be was a doctor or lawyer, or maybe study commerce as a third option. But I just sort of, and we had this idea drummed into us that if you didn't do really well at high school, if you didn't get top marks, then you would carry that, you would be burdened by that for the rest of your life. And I just kind of knew that was bullshit, which meant I didn't try that. I guess maybe it was an excuse to not try so hard at school because I didn't really find it interesting. So, ended up in this business degree. It was in the first year of uni that I discovered the internet. I was procrastinating about doing an accounting assignment and saw this little icon called Netscape Navigator, and that just kind of sent my imagination wild. I suddenly realised that was what I wanted to do. Didn't know exactly what, but I realised that the internet was the future, and immediately started learning how to build websites and just messing around, becoming an online citizen. And so by the time I graduated, it was 98, 99, the internet was really going gangbusters. With the dot-com bubble was I guess about to break. I got a job at a company called Aussie Mail Internet, which at the time was one of the biggest internet providers in Australia. It was up there with Telstra Big Pond.
I remember that one.
Yeah. It was. I mean, back in the early days of the internet, everyone either had an
Aussie
Mail, certainly not Hotmail. It was Aussie Mail or Telstra, something Telstra. Yeah. And so that seemed like a really cool company to work for. It was just an unskilled job in their tech support team, but to me it was a way of getting a foot in the door into the internet industry and the technology world. And it turned out that Fen had gone through a similar-ish experience. So Fen was a bit younger than me. He was most certainly a very talented hacker. As in a very good programmer at high school. Like, he was the kid who was dialing into banks and when everyone else was playing games, Fen was the one who was working out how to hack the game. And so he was a very talented programmer as a kid, and naturally just went into a programming degree, but found very quickly that he was just bored. Like, the course was so kind of beneath him. And his lecturers actually said, look, don't even bother doing this course. Go off and get a job. Spend some time figuring out what you want to do. And so, we came together in this tech support call centre at Aussie Mail in 1999. And as soon as we met, we kind of realised that we saw things a similar way. We were both ambitious. We both wanted to build things and build companies. And so the first company we built together was a web hosting business running off the end of a Telstra Big Pond cable connection. That sort of developed into a web hosting business that we ran just as a little money-making enterprise for a couple of years. We both, after Aussie Mail shut down their call centre in Melbourne, we moved to another internet provider called Pacific Internet, and that was just when ADSL was being rolled out for the first time. Fen moved into the technology division. I moved into sales and marketing, so that was where I developed a lot more of my experience as a marketing and sales and sort of communicator. I was in a role called sales engineering, which is a kind of conduit between the customer and the sales reps and the customers and the engineering teams of designing business internet solutions.
Because nobody knows how to talk to developers.
Well, developers don't know how to talk to customers, and engineers always say the wrong thing to customers. So we worked for Pacific Internet for about 4 years, and then decided that there was this growing market for the broadband. The DSL market was developing in such a way that there were all these little players wanting to become DSL resellers or VoIP providers, little companies that would do business network support. So we set up a company that was running, like sort of building and managing billing systems and mail systems and sort of designing stuff for little ISPs and telcos. And that was our first company. There was a serious company. It did make some money. It actually made too much money because then we forgot to do our taxes. And within a year or two, ended up with a huge tax debt and a GST debt. And when we finally faced up to the tax office, we had a big problem on our hands. So we actually, partly to do with that, and also the fact that we were kind of bored and burnt out from that company because it just wasn't very much fun. We kind of had to shut that down and spend some time going back to square one, getting some contracting work to pay off our tax debts, and then really start again. And so we started again in about 2007. And by that stage, the whole web, the big term was Web 2.0. There was the consumer web. Suddenly you had websites like, I guess, Facebook was emerging, and Hotmail got big, and the whole idea of building a company that was just a website that ordinary people used was becoming more of a viable thing. So we thought, well, and also we happened to have discovered this writer of essays from Silicon Valley called Paul Graham, who wrote what is now a very famous essay called How to Start a Startup. And we read that, and that kind of really opened our eyes as to the Silicon Valley way of building web-based companies. And we just were very inspired by that and thought this is really a lot more what we want to do. And it just so happened that around the time of shutting down that first business, it was when the low-cost airline market was really starting to take off. You had Jetstar starting to fly international, Tiger Airways, AirAsia. It was suddenly a lot more affordable for people like us who didn't have very much money but had a lot of flexibility. It was a lot easier for us to just take off to Thailand or Bali or anywhere at very low cost and with very little planning. So we thought, wow, this whole travel life is pretty cool, except the way websites, the travel search websites work really sucks. Maybe we should try building our own version of a flight search website. Yeah. How hard can it be? Yeah. Turns out really goddamn hard, I can tell you 5 years later. But that's what we did, and it's a mistake. It was a decision that over the last few years I've regretted, but I can tell you now that it's turned out to be, I think, a pretty good move.
Good. So you regret it, but now you finally seen fruition. You've got over that hurdle, I guess. Now
many hurdles. Yeah.
Sorry, can you just give a bit of context? I know there's a few guys that have played around with the site, but what is Adioso, first of all, in your own words?
Sure. So the way we think of Adioso now is a travel search engine for people who really care about having great travel experiences. So if you think of the incumbent travel websites are in Australia things like Webjet, and globally sort of Expedia or Kayak. All those sites are great at finding flights if you know exactly what you want to do, if you know exactly where you want to go and exactly when you're going there. But we figured that's really only useful if you've already if you've made a decision, particularly if you've got a meeting or you're going to see your family for Christmas or Thanksgiving. The way we approach it is we completely exclude business travel or planned travel with known dates and destinations. We want to be the product that's for people who just want to do something awesome. It could just be a week or a weekend in Bali, or it could be a 3-month adventure across Africa and Europe. That's the direction we're going down, is being the search and planning and booking tool for really awesome travel experiences.
Okay, so you decided to build this search engine. 5 years later, it's a real pain in the ass to do. You're finally seeing some success. What was it going to... sorry, some of the frustrations that I know that you had were that must be incredible hurdles, as you said, were I'm guessing partnerships, or what you referred to as inventory?
Inventory, yeah. So, so when you go to a flight search website and you do a search and you get flight results back, but that's the flights are what we refer to as inventory or stock.
Yep.
So that's one of the biggest challenges we've had is getting access to enough inventory from enough different airlines to enough different destinations in a accurate and timely format. That's been actually the hardest thing to do.
So is it the airlines, they have an allocation of tickets?
Yep.
Basically, Expedia's put their hand up, so I'm taking this many, and then you guys are fighting to try and get.
No. So I don't want to go into a long-winded story about the history of the flight distribution system, but the short version is it was built 40 years ago. So there's a company called Sabre. If you've ever been into an old-fashioned bricks and mortar travel agency, you'll see they've got these old black terminal screens, and when you do a search, I'll type the search into the screen and then tell you the prices and print out the tickets. There was a company called Sabre that was founded about 50 years ago, and that's what's controlled all of the distribution of flights around the world. And there are about 2 other companies that are similar. It's astonishing how little their technology has changed in 50 years. And so the thing that's held us back is trying to build a very modern travel search experience when you're still constrained by fair distribution technology that's up to 50 years old and is not changing very quickly at all.
So is that like sorry, this is actually from your post, but so there was a focus. That was the reason that the initial focus was on Australia first, because there was a bit more.
Yeah. So the reason why, until very recently, like literally a few weeks ago, we've only ever really been a search engine for low-cost airlines, and until about 3 months ago, we only had a handful of airlines really, mainly in Australia and Southeast Asia, and the reason for that is that it's much easier it was much easier to build a technology platform that could handle low-cost airlines, because the way their fares are structured is very, very simple.
Yep.
And also we could get the fares just by going and scraping their websites.
Yep.
Whereas to then load traditional airlines, like full-service airlines that fly across continents and to all of the more obscure destinations, that's been much more difficult, and it's required us to build a completely different technology platform and actually change a lot about how the product works.
Can we go, if you don't mind, going back in your journey a little bit too here? So I think a lot of guys here, they've got their own startup or they're thinking about starting a business and that kind of thing. Can you go through some of the process? So you had this idea, you were fortunate enough to be, developers and, a bit business savvy in your own right. What was the process you went through to get some money, I guess? Without talking too much, I know you didn't want to talk about that, but how you went about getting money, showing people that it wasn't just an idea and then, making it a business, and then a bit about being accountable to those investors then.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, look, I mean, and I'm happy to talk about fundraising. It's always been very hard for us. But I mean, going back to the start, I mean, the way we got the business off the ground was we built an MVP, minimum viable product.
Can you talk about that real quick too?
Yeah, totally. Well, so when we were building the first version, it was in 2007, and so does everyone here know what I'm talking about when I mention 99 Designs? 99 Designs is it's a crowdsourcing website where you can, if you have a need for a website to be designed, or a logo, or a brochure, or a letterhead or something, instead of going to a graphic designer who might charge $100 an hour or $200 an hour, and the bill ends up being several thousand, you can write up a spec and post it to this crowdsourcing website called 99 Designs.
Do we have Ophelia here? No? No? Oh, you're from 99 Designs?
No, I'm friends with her.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Okay.
I thought we want to have...
Right, I do know Ophelia. And so what then happens is that a global... It gets pushed out to a global marketplace of designers, and you can set a budget. You say, I'm willing to spend, say, $500 or $2,000 or whatever you want for whoever comes up with the best design matching this brief. And then a whole lot of designers will come up with their own submission, and then you choose the best one, and whoever wins gets the prize. So, I mean, a lot of people hate it. It's quite controversial, and particularly graphic designers hate it because it really sort of messes up the way they've always worked. But I can tell you, as a startup founder, it was gold for us, and really without it, we wouldn't have been able to start Adioso. So we used, because we happened to be friends with a guy who worked at SitePoint, which was a company that spawned 99 Designs. And so we kind of knew about that concept, which in those days was called the SitePoint Marketplace. So we built this technology that Fen had written this code that could go to low-cost airline websites and pull them all into a database and make them searchable. We were then able to get a design done by spending only about $400 or $500. I think
So
we paid.
how did that look?
Great.
Yeah.
It looks really great. Yeah.
So this is what, $600 10 years ago, though?
5 years ago. Yeah. So, yep, I think we paid $300 for the logo, and the logo is pretty much as it is now. And then another about $500 for the design and the HTML coding.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, and the turnaround time was about a week, and then we were able to integrate it and get it up there. And I mean, Fen had probably spent about 6 months writing the code, but once we decided to turn it into an actual public website, that process wouldn't have taken more than about 4 weeks.
Okay, so just before you go any further, the process that you went for, you've designed you've got the design, your mate's done a lot of the code, you got this minimum viable product right now. What kind of user testing or whatever were you doing?
Yeah.
To see how people were playing with it?
Yeah, we didn't really do any user testing. We didn't even really know that existed. The way we started to get distribution was by posting it on a website called OzBargain. A lot of people here might know of OzBargain. It's a website. It's like a community forum where people can just post bargains and discounts and deals they find. And so what our technology was able to do was alert us when, say, Jetstar or Tiger Airways or AirAsia had one of those big sales where they might put an ad in the newspaper or send out a whole lot of emails. We were the first to know about that. So when we detected a sale, we would then go and publish it on a deal on OzBargain, and that drove quite a lot of traffic. And so then we were able to see, just from the discussion people were having about the site, we could then understand what people liked, what they didn't like, and then what we should do next. To be honest, we were really surprised at how quickly people took to it. I personally never thought Adioso was a good idea. It was actually Fen's idea. I thought it was... I just didn't think there was a need for a new travel site, and just taking a look at the travel industry scared the hell out of me. I thought, really, I don't think this is a good idea at all. But I was willing to kind of humour Fen and let him go ahead and just test the idea. And I thought we'd learn something just by getting it was our first attempt at getting a consumer website up there. So I'm like, yeah, whatever, we'll do it. It'll be interesting. We'll realise it's not going to work, and then go off and do something else.
Were you sold once you seen people start
Once I
coming
saw
through?
people using it and getting really excited, and people emailing us through the feedback form and saying, holy shit, this is amazing. And I was like, wow, maybe there's something in this. Yeah, because people were getting more excited about our site than I'd ever got about any other travel site. I mean, one of the reasons I thought it was such a bad idea was that every travel website I'd used sucked horribly. I was like, wow, every travel website sucks. Why would we want to go and do the same thing? Obviously, you didn't quite detect the irony in what I was saying, but yeah. So we saw that excitement, and we thought, well, maybe we should pursue this. And it was after about 6 or 8 months of just sort of letting it run and improving it a bit that we then applied to this incubator in Silicon Valley called Y Combinator.
So that all those people that were coming across to your website and spending money on your website became like basically a case study or the application that you put forward? Yeah. So for those who don't know, Y Combinator is an incubator in Silicon Valley. It's quite similar to another well-known incubator these days is 500 Startups, or here in Australia you've got StartMate and AngelCube here in Melbourne, and also PushStart. And really what they do is they'll take people who just have an idea or an MVP, but who seem to be promising, and they'll give them a small amount of money, usually about $15,000, $20,000, but that they put in intensive mentorship over particularly the first 3 months. They put you through this sort of
mentorship program where they're helping you work really hard to get your product to a point where you can then raise further funding from investors. So at that stage, Y Combinator was the only one really, so we had to go to America to get anything like that. There was just nothing like that existing in Melbourne at all.
He's downplaying a little bit. It's kind of pretty much like the Harvard, version of startup school. Really, like now it's number one. It's voted number one, but so it must be like you still get a bit of prestige being.
It is very prestigious, and it was hugely thrilling. Like it was amazing for us to get to get accepted for an interview and be able to go and present our idea to Paul Graham, who had kind of been such an inspiration through essays that he'd written. And that alone was an amazing experience. To then get accepted and suddenly be thrust into this world of venture capitalists, and we're in the same batch as Airbnb, which many of you might know is one of the hottest startups in Silicon Valley these days. So yeah, it was amazing, and it suddenly meant that everything had changed for us from just having this little flight search website that we sort of hacked together and didn't really think was a big deal, to suddenly, well, it is a big deal, and we now have to take it seriously. We have to learn about the travel industry. We have to figure out what people really want and how we can turn this into an actual company that makes money and grows. And
so not to harp on this, because I know that there's. I want to definitely talk about where you've come, and I know it's a long way. But did the product evolve a lot in that time in the accelerator program?
For us, it didn't, because we kind of built our MVP, our sort of version 0.1. By the time we got to Y Combinator, we already had a pretty strong idea of what we wanted the next version to look like. So
it was more focusing on how you're going to impress investors?
Yeah, there was that. It was just getting the new version live, and then it was more just figuring out how we could transition it from being just a couple of websites, there's a couple of airlines in Australia, to being a global thing. So yeah, we didn't actually do a huge amount of coding compared to what other people would do. We did a lot more sort of tearing our hair out, trying to figure out how we could get it into a viable product.
Okay, and sorry, so let me, if I can just try and explain this process to the guys and tell me, I want to make sure I get it right too, is you go through this 3-month mentorship, and basically then all these investors are all sitting in one room waiting to see you give a nice presentation at the front,
yep.
And they all decide whether they're going to invest in your company there.
Kind of.
So can you
they decide if they're going to talk to you any further.
Yep.
Yeah. So the culmination of the mentorship program is what they call demo day, and so what happens is they invite all of the investors in Silicon Valley, and well, anyone who wants to come who is known to be a serious investor. They all come and fill a room that's sort of much like this and seated much as you guys are now, and you present. And so in our day, there were 15 or 16 startups in our batch, and we each had 7 minutes to present. So that gives you time to do a proper demo of your product and talk through the business model and talk about why you're good people to run this business. But all you're really trying to do from that presentation is just convince investors that you're worth talking to further. You're never going to convince them to write a check for $10,000 or $100,000 from that 7-minute pitch, but you can convince them to have a chat with you further and then try and tee up a meeting to discuss.
Are they talking to you even beforehand? I heard like a lot of guys start talking to them well before the demo.
So a lot's changed since then. So we went through it nearly 4 years ago. It was 4 years ago now that we'd just been accepted and we're preparing to go over. These days it's a lot's changed. It's a lot bigger. So like I said, our batch was 16. These days the most recent batch I think was 90 companies. You can imagine with that many companies all presenting to the one group of investors on demo day, they can't all have 7 minutes. So these days the pitches are only 2 minutes, I think, 2.5 minutes maybe. So they can't even do a demo. All they can do is just, it's barely more than an elevator pitch.
Yeah, because everyone's falling asleep, right?
Oh, totally. Yeah. So, but it also means it's that much more important to really stand out from the crowd and really sort of make a big impact. But yeah, these days they introduce the founders to investors much earlier. In fact, what they have these days, there's been a bit of coverage of this issue in the startup world in the last couple of weeks is that there are investors now who invest in every Y Combinator company, no matter how good they are or not. So just by getting into Y Combinator, up to the last batch, you automatically got $150,000 funding from separate investors that were not from Y Combinator. In the next batch, that's going to come down to about $80,000.
Wow.
But then they take you through, they introduce you to angel investors, and angel investors become mentors even well before demo day. And also they've got a similar thing going on with VCs as well.
So what was the result of your demo day, and was that the kickstart in your mind of how, like, let's get serious with it?
I mean, it certainly was. Just getting into Y Combinator was the kickstarter of it being a serious thing. We were able to raise an amount of $70,000 straight out of demo day. Not very much at all by today's standards. So the batch that we were in was it was in early 2009, which you might remember was really when the global financial crisis was at its lowest,
right.
And everyone, well, globally, but particularly in Silicon Valley, were kind of not freaking out. There was just a lot of uncertainty. No one really knew what was going to happen. There were genuine concerns that the entire global economic system might collapse. So there was not a lot of funding around at all. So we were lucky enough to have some investors who were sort of our age, and they'd also been through Y Combinator themselves. They were willing to put in a combined total of $70,000. That was just enough for us to keep going for about a year, and it just found myself. We couldn't employ anyone else. We couldn't do anything that couldn't hire officers or even really move to Silicon Valley. We actually chose to come back and keep working from Melbourne just because we thought that was going to be lower costs and a bit safer.
And did it, like, in that time, like, because I just from my own reading and stuff, I saw that a lot of people, they said if they had a couple more founders in their group, seemed to get a lot more done. Did you find it like a disadvantage just to have the two of you, or?
Yeah, but maybe. I often thought that, or wondered how much more done we could have achieved had we had someone else on the team. But equally, I feel like we would have done the wrong thing. So we could have brought in a third founder. We could have brought in two more founders. But
and then the arguments started happening, right?
It's really hard to find good people. And Fen and I, by that stage, we had 10 years friendship together. Didn't mean we always agreed or that everything was always rosy between us. It certainly wasn't. But we at least understood each other. And so to kind of bring in other people in that intense, high-pressure environment might have done more damage, maybe. And I think I look back and realised that the challenge for us at that time wasn't so much about getting a lot of work done. It was more about learning about the industry and working out what we had to do.
And okay, so you said that lasted for a year. What happened, and how have you kept going? Was there more investment, or was you starting to see some money coming through the business?
We've only started generating revenue like literally 2 or 3 weeks ago. Over 5 years in business, actually made our first dollar off selling a flight about 3 weeks ago. It was early 2010 that we closed our biggest round of funding. We had a few people that some approached us, some we were introduced to, who were people in the travel industry in Australia, who put together a round of nearly $300,000. Again, by today's standards, not a huge amount of money. So, to put that in context, these days, a company coming out of Y Combinator that is in the top sort of 20% best companies would expect to raise at least 500,000, if not $1 million or $2 million, fairly easily, and at a very good valuation, the valuation of $5 or $10 million or more. It was a completely different story when we went through, just like I said, because of the GFC. It wasn't just us, like everyone in our batch found it very hard to raise. But so we raised 300K. It was at that stage we brought on a third founder, and we made him an equal partner in the business. and that was when we started getting really serious about building technology. Prior to that, it had been a pretty basic, primitive. It was just using a MySQL database. It didn't have a huge amount of power or intelligence in it. It was after we got that funding that we started building a very elaborate flight search engine that could kind of be almost a new generation of something like Sabre. And
Sorry, so the guy that you found, because I know there's a lot of problem for a lot of people out there.
Finding people?
Yeah, how did you find him?
Yeah.
And what was his role when he came in?
Yeah, so we knew that what we needed most was a hardcore engineer. Then is extremely talented, one of the most talented programmers possibly in Australia and beyond. But he's a generalist. We knew we needed someone who could be a hardcore algorithm hacker, someone who loved dealing in what's called routing algorithms and shortest path algorithms, stuff that serious computer scientists get into. One of the main advantages of being a Y Combinator funded company is that you can post job listings on their jobs board, which gets published on the Hacker News website. So if anyone who's a regular reader of Hacker News will often see a post that's obviously a job advertisement that doesn't have a link to post comments on it. So we were able to post job listings there, and had a good number of applicants, probably about 40 or 50.
Interviews on Skype or
just interviews on Skype? Yeah.
So he's an American guy?
He was in New Zealand, so he was originally American, but he'd moved to Wellington about 5 or 6 years earlier.
And he was bored shitless over there.
He was in Tennessee, and he's not the sort of guy who fits in well in Tennessee. There's not many nerds or hipsters in Tennessee. He found his home in Wellington, and he was a traveller, and he loved travelling, and he understood. He'd had the same frustrations about travel that we'd had, and he was excited by the opportunity to join us in solving it. So he actually came over to Melbourne and lived with us, and so he worked on some pretty impressive novel technology for about 6 months after that, and that was what got us up to the point where for the first time we were able to go and get our big PR push by getting written about on TechCrunch and Lifehacker, and that was when we got our big traffic spike. I think we got about 20 or 30,000 visits in 2 days.
So how did you go? Like, everyone wants to, I think, try and generate some PR around their startup.
Yeah.
Is there a specific process that you went through to try and get attention of, this writer over here at TechCrunch, or
Yeah. So for us, we had it pretty easy because in those days, with being a Y Combinator company, TechCrunch would write a post about every company that launched out of Y Combinator. So it was literally a case of going to Paul Graham at Y Combinator and saying, okay, we're ready to launch, and we'd have a chat about what our pitch is, what our story is, and then he'd send he'd write to someone at TechCrunch and say, okay, these guys are launching, and
it's pretty handy.
It was handy, yeah. I don't really think it works that way anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, that was 2 years ago. I think that the whole technology news landscape has changed a lot. TechCrunch is probably not as important as it was, and Mashable is more important. We've also got Pando Daily and Business Insider, and you can't just rely on
Startup
being Startup Grind, yeah. So you can't just, it's not enough just to get on TechCrunch, and you can't. There are so many Y Combinator funded companies now. You can't just rely on that brand as being a ticket to publicity.
Are you keeping up relationships with some of these guys at Tech? Sorry, I wrote for Tech Cocktail, TechCrunch.
So we haven't. We're not those sorts of people.
Yeah.
And so people who are good at that, then that's a definite advantage. I know plenty of successful entrepreneurs in Melbourne are very good at building and maintaining good relationships with people in the Australian technology media, people like your Asher Moses and Ben Grubb at Fairfax, and Renai LeMay at Delimiter, and a few others that I'm sure I'm forgetting. But there are plenty of channels, plenty of paths to publicity in Australia, and but I guess it doesn't matter if it's in Australia or the US. Everyone's looking for the same thing. Journalists want to tell good stories. So if your business, what it does is a good story, as in it enables users to create good stories. It solves an important life problem that resonates with people. Or if there's a good story behind the business, then there's always a way to get written about. So, I think that's part of what I'm doing now with this essay series is actually about getting a lot more serious about telling our story and having a story that explains the history and the whole kind of what the company stands for, and whether journalists write about that or not. They might not, it doesn't matter, because that's actually the great thing these days is that you don't need to get written about in other publications or in mainstream media. Anyone can put up a blog and then anyone can post that story to Hacker News or to some other news discussion forum. So if you have a good story and you're good at telling that story, then you can generate your own publicity, and that's really what we're doing now.
Yeah, it's almost better that if I was to say, look, check out Tom's story rather than, like a little bit that indirect promotion, I guess, from other people. Like, I love this blog, check it out.
Well, exactly. Yeah.
And you said that series that you're writing where you're completely honest about the struggles, and I think, that kind of resonates with everyone, in the startup world. I'm not alone. And as long as you hear the story, like, all right, we're back on track, and I don't want it to hit, too low. And
I've had plenty of people express concern for my well-being, or complain that it's all just a bit grim and.
But it did end up,
I'm glad you got that far from it, because I was worried that you did.
No, I was worried about it. I missed the 18-month bit. But so you've got this third founder. He's helping you with the business. You're getting really serious about it. How's it going from there?
Yeah. So. The big milestone that we were building up for was the launch, and we get on TechCrunch and suddenly have all this traffic, and then in our minds we're like, cool, once we get on TechCrunch, then everyone will know about us, and we'll have all these customers, and then we can just do those other little bits of things we need to do to start making it awesome and making money, and then everything will be great. And then in reality, what happens is you get 20,000 users in one day. The day after that, your traffic drops back to pretty much what it was the day before, and then you sort of sit back and watch for a few days, thinking that maybe people will come back, and they don't, and then you're in what at Y Combinator they call the trough of sorrow, which is this period of time that can go for anything from a couple of months to several years, where you've got out there, you've launched, you've got your initial validation or lack of validation, but then you're just desperately trying to work things out. You're iterating, you're user testing, you're doing whatever you can to try and get this product and this company working. It turned out for us that we kind of, in retrospect, miscalculated in that by the time we launched on TechCrunch, we probably only had about 6 months money left in the bank. It turned out not to be enough money, or it didn't give us enough time to do what we had to do to get through the trough of sorrow and back into a growth phase. So that's kind of what got us to the point where I started writing these essays. We basically hit a brick wall. We got to a point where we were completely out of money. We went back to, with a big part of what remained of our funds, we flew back to San Francisco to talk to Paul Graham at Y Combinator, and he basically said, look, you guys have got no growth, you've got no special insight you've discovered. His quote was, you raised a bunch of money, you failed to hit your milestone, that's what failed startups look like. And it took him to point it out, but we just had all the hallmarks of a failed startup that was that no sensible investor would invest in, because it really looked like we were about to fail.
But this must have been, more than tough love to you when you look at this guy and he's basically saying you fucked it up. And was it tough love? Or was it like?
Look, it was. It's kind of tough love, and it's also kind of somewhat protective.
It must have been hurtful. to hear it from him. Yeah.
Look, it was very hard and it was very upsetting because we'd raised money relatively easily, even though it wasn't a huge amount of money. It had come to us fairly easily, so we didn't have to work that hard for it. We kind of had thought that, we can just go out and talk to new investors and we can raise some more just as easily as we did last time. Not realising the way the whole thing works is that when you're a new company, that you look all shiny, then investors are willing to invest in you because you look like you're a hot new thing that's about to take off. If a year later you haven't taken off, then you look like damaged goods, and no one wants to invest in damaged goods. So this is all stuff that we didn't realise until we had to face up to it.
So does that become a conversation to the investors that did invest to you, trying to get more money out of them so they don't lose what they originally invested? If you know what I mean?
We didn't have the gall to go and ask our investors for more money. We didn't think that they would be opening their wallets. And we'd already had some difficult relationships with our investors just because, and this is what made everything difficult, is that we had a fairly clear idea of what we were trying to do, but it was so different to what image everyone had of the way travel websites should work, that it was difficult to get everyone else on board with that. And so we didn't have good support. We had a lot of encouragement from our investors, but we didn't really get their endorsement and buy-in to our strategy and plan. Part of that was just we didn't do a good enough job of selling it to them. Like, we weren't good enough at explaining exactly what was going on and what we were doing and why we were doing it. So that then when suddenly things were, looking really grim, it came as a bit of a shock to them, and they hadn't had time to really think it through and prepare for it. So then they panicked and freaked out, and then started thinking that we had just screwed up, that we were incompetent, and that we certainly weren't worthy of any more money from them.
So how do you take all that? That's all on your shoulders. How did you see your way through?
Yeah. So I mean, we kind of. Well, we had to ask some very deep questions about whether we should persist at all, and that's what this latest essay so I gave Chris a copy of the essay that should be published and available for you all to read later this week. But there was a lot of soul searching, a lot of thinking through of all of the issues, all the factors. Questions like, do we want to be in the travel industry at all, or is it just too hard? Am I even up to it? I was kind of quite burnt out, fatigued, really struggling just to even get out of bed in the morning. My relationship with Fen hadn't gone bad, but we just weren't communicating very well, and we weren't supporting each other very well.
You said he was taking freelance work to help you both?
Yep. So he took some contracting work. I just took some time out of the beach house down in Lawn. And
you probably love that.
Yeah, you can imagine how much he loved having to do contracting work to pay not just for his living expenses but mine as well. And so, but then really, like, what we did, when I decided that there was a way through this, I knew that the thing that we had to do was start building a new team. And it was funny how the realisation came to me that we should and could build a new team actually came when we'd run out of money. So by that stage, Andrew, who had been with us for the previous year, he'd sort of just got burnt out and exhausted and went off. I mean, he, I think, thought that we were going to be going out of business too, much like our investors did. So he went back to New Zealand and started, getting other contracting work. So it was just back to Fen and myself, and no money and no one really to support us. I realised that now's the time to start hiring people, because you'll get people who really understand the vision. And so I put some more job listings up on Hacker News and was amazed at how enthusiastic the reaction was. And that was a big motivator for me to continue, because I was like, it's okay, even if investors don't believe in us and Fen and I don't even really believe in ourselves that much, there are people out there, like really, really talented engineers and designers who get what we're trying to do. Like, they understand the problem we're trying to solve and the sort of company we're trying to build, and they are willing to talk to us even though they knew we had no money, in fact they were quite excited by the opportunity to work for a company that was at what was kind of a back to square one, because it meant they could get some good equity and they could be a part of our resurgence and our growth and get some good upside.
And how many people was that you took on?
Well, so we had about 6 people that we started getting to work with us, and what we said to all of them was, look, we can't offer you anything apart from some equity for the time you put in. We can't make any other promises. We don't know when we're going to get funding. We don't even know, we have no idea if this will end up being something that can give you a job. But if you just want to help us out, if you can design some stuff, if you can work on some back-end code, whatever, just give us whatever time you can spare in your weekends or between contracts you're working on, or if there are some who are university students just in your uni break. Just do what you can. And it took, what we decided to do was just communicate with them as if they were on the team, and we just send them weekly updates about what we were doing. And that just allowed us to bit by bit build some momentum. And it took a couple of months, but we then started getting a couple of the guys to go, oh cool, I can see what you're doing, and I can see something I can build that I'd be really excited to build that will help you guys in this way. And so that just kind of happened and developed and snowballed over about 6 months. And we got to the start of this year in January, and we ended up having what had become then effectively a new team of 4 people, myself then and a couple of guys in the US. And that's now, those guys have been working with us for all of this year, and they're the ones who have enabled us to build the product that we now have, that we've just gone live with in the last few weeks.
Yeah, I saw the new look.
Yeah, completely new look, completely new back-end technology. We can now handle every airline, every destination in the world. It does everything that we always sort of set out to do from the beginning.
So was those guys a big part of your lease on life? And I'll leave it there after this question because I want to let everyone ask a few questions themselves. But was that like a re-energizing?
Oh, it was everything. Yeah. And I mean, getting towards the end of the year now, I'm reflecting a lot on where we were last year, and I vividly remember how I was feeling as we got to Christmas and New Year, and just thinking, wow, early to mid-year, it just seemed like everything was just pointless, and everything we tried to build for so long, it was just for nothing. And now we've got these awesomely talented people, and it was nothing more than that. It was just the fact that we've got these guys who they're really good guys, they're amazingly talented, and they're wanting to work with us because they're wanting to work with us for the right reasons. Not because they really think they'll make a lot of money, certainly in the short term, but they want to work with us because they're excited by our vision. They want to work with Fan and myself, and they want to do something great. And
is that something now you go, I'm glad I didn't quit, and glad
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, right now I'm just feeling so great and optimistic about where we're going. There's just so much promise and opportunity, and I'm really feeling like 2013 should be a huge year for us.
Awesome. I want to give you guys a chance. I've been hogging all the questions to ask Tom a few questions, and let's open it up. Yeah.
Someone first?
Can you just tell us more about your vision? What would be like the best case scenario, sort of 3 to 5 years if you're going to start your company that sort of go into?
Yeah, so look, I mean, we often get asked a lot by investors and people generally if we want to just be acquired by some other company or if we want to be a standalone thing. Particularly in Australia, people kind of expect and investors want you to just build for an acquisition. We don't want to do that. We think that this company has what it takes to be a big standalone company in its own right, and something that can compete certainly against the biggest travel agencies in Australia, but potentially the world as well. We want the company to be a really appealing company for the most talented engineers and designers and creatives and everyone who really care about travel. It's an observation that we made that the go-to companies these days are companies like Google and Facebook and Twitter, and they're the ones that can attract the very best people and that will pay them the most money for the very best. we think that there's something missing in that set. There's no company that is a really awesome travel company that the very best people want to work for. So that's kind of the niche.
Airbnb, sort of obviously not directly a travel company, but it's that's some space.
I mean, the only caveat to that I would say is Airbnb. And the thing that we have that Airbnb doesn't, one of very few things we have that they don't, is that we've got a lot more some really hardcore engineering problems. So Airbnb's biggest problems are to do with managing their community and the security of the way their bookings are done and funds are transferred and also the security of people's property. Whereas there's less in the way of really hardcore engineering algorithm type stuff that is very much at the core of what we do.
Go ahead.
A couple of quick questions. You mentioned about engineering. Is your system essentially some kind of artificial intelligence then? That is more than just looking up and going from here to here. It's somehow you're building it. You build a profile.
That's where we go.
Facebook, the sort of things you like doing, and then it makes suggestions.
Yeah. So when you say that, you sound like you're describing a whole lot of failed travel startups in the last 2 or 3 years. There has been a proliferation of companies in the travel world that will hook into your Facebook and then also Twitter and whatever else, and then try and work out what you want to do and make recommendations. So I don't want to sound like we're just trying to do that sort of thing that's failed for so many other companies. But we certainly are trying to be an intelligent search engine that can learn about what the user wants, learn about your preferences, about where you want to go, what airlines you like to fly, whether you prefer economy, premium economy, business class, whether you like to stay in Airbnb accommodation or hostels or 5-star hotels. And then by doing that, we can make recommendations to you, or we can just make the results you see when you come to the site to do a search, we can make them much more relevant and reduce the amount of time that it takes you to find the best option for you.
Let's ask the second part, which is more general. You're here in Australia, your mentors were in the US.
Yeah.
What difference do they still support you and help you? And overall, what difference did that make? Would the whole thing have been easier if you'd had mentors here or if you had been in the US?
Yeah, look, I think it's a bit of both. I think, so Y Combinator, the sort of support they give is they'll give you all the support in the world if you go and ask for it. They don't come. I mean, they've funded 500 or more companies now, so they don't go chasing you. But when you show up needing advice, needing help, then they will give you a lot of help. Sometimes that's just a brutal, telling you what you need to hear, which is what happened to us. But that's still really important, valuable help. So yes, it was somewhat of a disadvantage for us that we weren't in that area. We could only really go and see Paul and the other partners on the odd occasion that we were in town. And so we were a bit isolated from the Y Combinator community and the wider Silicon Valley world, and that's, I think, made it harder for just being known in the scene and being able to talk to investors and raise big amounts of money. On the flip side, it wasn't really a big choice for us. Like we kind of came back to Melbourne because we didn't have enough money or really enough confidence in what we were doing to know that we would be able to survive over there. And part of that is just because we're in travel, which is somewhat separate from the mainstream Silicon Valley world. So I think had we been a social network or something that's kind of comparable to a Dropbox or Stripe or something like that, then it makes a lot of sense to be in Silicon Valley. For us, being a travel company, it wasn't like there are travel industry experts on your doorstep in Silicon Valley any more than there are here. In fact, Melbourne, being the home of Lonely Planet and STA Travel, and you've got What If in Queensland, there's a really big travel industry in Australia, and particularly in Melbourne. We've found just as many useful experts here as we would have found in Silicon Valley.
Sorry,
it's just a point of difference. Like the Webjet and that were already established when you started this.
Oh, very much so. Yeah.
And what your point of difference is that you offer more of an experience. So is that like, say I wanted to go, I flew to Toronto this year, and I found it was like looking at flights, it was like, I'm just going to go to the travel agent because it's too hard.
Yeah.
But I wanted a more in-depth travel. Is that what your website sort of offers?
Yeah. So over time we want to get more and more comprehensive in how much of the trip we allow you to plan. So we're starting with the flights.
Yeah.
And we want to be the
if
most.
I can put in like an end destination, and this is where I'm starting, like you figure out a cool way.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's the idea. And then along the way, help you find the right accommodation for you, the right activities and experiences for you.
That's an awesome idea. I want to continue. How starting out, how did you get the investors to take you seriously? Like,
we only got a very small number of them to take it seriously. All of so we had two main investors in that round.
Yeah.
One of them approached us. The story was that he's a guy who's he worked for Deloitte. He's been a senior guy in the Deloitte innovation team. Some of you might know Deloitte has a very active innovation and technology division, and this guy was one of them, and so he was just interested in startups. He happened to hear about us when he was in a Specsavers, chatting with his wife, having some argument about how to find the best flights, and the Specsavers shop assistant overheard and said, "Oh, you really need to check out this site, Adioso." And so he went home and checked it out, and mind blown, emailed us and said, "Wow, you guys are doing some awesome stuff here." And so he was the one, because he was connected at Deloitte's, he was able to open a bunch of doors, get us some contacts in the travel industry. But so that was a personal thing. Like, he just used it, saw it, got it, loved it, and then wanted to invest. Another one, the other major investor in that round, had heard a podcast I'd done of an event similar to this, where I just told the story, and he was like, "That's a great story. Really like the sound of you guys. Want to invest."
And that's just like you guys like taking a leap of faith and deciding to make a website, and they've seen that.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So I guess more broadly, the pattern of people who have invested versus people who haven't, and I've particularly in the last year have talked to a lot of people about try to convince them to invest, and most have said no. And the people who have said no have always been people who don't personally understand and feel the problem that we're trying to solve. They're people who are just happy enough with the way they can travel, either using Webjet or their local travel agency. They don't really personally get what we're trying to do. The person who's been the biggest investor this year, and we've ended up, I didn't explain that, we've raised nearly $300,000 this year, just in the last 6 months. And the biggest investor in that batch was actually recommended, he was referred to us from his daughter, who's a friend of the site, a really big fan of ours and a big user of ours. And so he was like, "Wow, I've never seen my daughter so excited about a product," and then he used it himself and loved it and thought, "Well, yeah, I can see how that can be huge. I want to be a part of it." But it's always people who they don't so much see it as a money-making opportunity. They see it as something potentially great that they just want to be involved with. And they hope it'll make money, and they certainly don't want to lose their money. But as long as they're happy they're not going to lose their money, they just want to be part of the movement.
Yeah. All right, thanks.
Sorry, Zamrani.
Yeah. So you started in 2007, and it has taken you 5 years
Yeah.
to make your first buck.
Yeah.
So now, if you had to restart it years again, what would you do different to cut that period short?
Yeah.
That's a good question.
It's it's sort of one of those hypotheticals that is almost unanswerable because
I'm saying it because he thinks it can help everyone here. It's not going to help you.
yeah. So a big part of there are two things, and I think that some of the biggest problems for us have been things that only time could solve. And one of those was that it just takes a long time to really learn enough about the travel industry to understand what problems you should be solving and understand how to solve them. So just last month I went to two conferences, one in Singapore, the Web in Travel conference, and then one in Phoenix, Arizona, which is the Focusrite conference, and they're both. Well, Focusrite is like the biggest travel industry conference in the world, and there's a lot of discussion at those conferences about innovation and startups, and a lot of cynicism about startups because there are all these. They'll have these pitch events, and new brighter-eyed startups will get up and present their big ideas, and all of the seasoned veterans, of whom I'm almost one now, will kind of sit back and scoff, and everyone kind of knows that most of them will be nowhere in 6 months, because you just. And the comment I'm hearing in a lot of presentations is that new people to the industry really can't innovate in travel because you actually have to be kind of a veteran to even know where to start. And so for us, it took 5 years of becoming industry veterans to then start again. 5 years, 3.5 years.
So would it have been better if you had an SME from the industry?
Or if I'd worked for Webjet or What If or Expedia. But the problem with that is that, most of the people at these conferences are people who work for those huge companies like Expedia or Priceline or Kayak. And yeah, they've got the credibility and they've got, but anyone who's been a senior manager at Expedia could easily go and get a couple of $1 million if they had a good idea and could sell it well. But the problem then is that you kind of blink it in the way you look at the industry because you look at it from the perspective of having been in the mainstream and doing it the conventional way. So I feel like we've got that perfect balance now of we're still outsiders, we still came to it as newbies 5 years ago, but we've now got enough history to really have that intuition and really sort of travel is in our bones now. We know what to do. The other thing is just technology. It's only literally in the last year that technology enables us to do what we do. There are certain database platforms and approaches to programming that have enabled us to build the product that we probably couldn't have, unless we were like Larry and Sergey and could build Google-type cloud technology. It's really only now that it's even possible to do what we're doing.
Yeah.
What were those technologies?
Much detail? I'd make a fool of myself to try and talk about it in too much detail. That's Fen's department. But we're going to start writing Fen and the other engineers are going to start writing some tech-focused blog posts to talk about our tech stack. I mean, I can tell you one thing we did. The previous version of our flight search platform was built using Python, Python compiled into C, and we made a decision earlier this year to rebuild the engine using Lucene and Java. And
search.
Lucene's search. It's a scaling search. See, I'm making a fool of myself talking about it. So we wouldn't have chosen Java apart from the fact that it enabled us to use Lucene.
We'll take one more question.
Just wondering, what's the big takeaway from your journey? Just went through the hard time and didn't have enough run of money and want to run another second run of money. Just what's your takeaway from the hard time?
Look, I mean, to me, the big takeaway is that success always takes a long time, and you're not going to. The one way to guarantee you'll fail is to quit. So, that doesn't mean, you shouldn't just persist doing something that's clearly failing, but it's very important to think hard about whether the reason you're failing is that the idea is bad or if the execution is bad. And either's fine, because if the idea is bad, then you can just change to a new idea, and if the execution is bad, then you just need to change the execution. But either way, you just got to keep going, and you shouldn't be married to your ideas. Ideas are a good starting point, but you need to be flexible and willing to change direction and adapt and see new opportunities. But I think more broadly than that, you need to have something that you deeply believe in. And for us at Adioso, it's yes, we're trying to build technology and we're trying to build a product. But this is kind of what I'm going into in these essays I'm writing. The reason I've chosen to persist and the reason I chose to stick with Adioso is that it's aligned with a belief I have about the ability everyone has to build an amazing life, and that if you are just open to new ideas and you're really determined and you're willing to examine yourself, then you can, like, anyone can do great things, but you've got to have principles and beliefs and determination and have a great story, and if you just keep working at building that, developing that, then you can go anywhere.
How do you encourage the people, in difficult time, like run out of money, and some people just want to walk away?
Encourage team members?
Yeah, the team member just to keep working with you and just stick with the idea.
Yeah, well, I mean, so you have to get people in the first place who are in it for the right reasons. People who are driven by the vision, not by next week's paycheck. And that's what you do. Yes, you have to look after them. You have to make sure that you're giving them enough money that they're not starving, or they're not seriously kind of panicking about their financial situation. But companies don't die just because they get stomped on by a competitor or they run out of money. Companies die because the team members and the founders quit. As long as you're determined to keep going because you've got something deep you believe in and an ability to sell that, then you'll always find a way to keep going. What happened to us? We lost our entire team. Like we had, I didn't talk about this, but we had other people working for us as well. We lost all our team and it was just back to Fen and myself. But that didn't kill the company. We just started again, attracted new people, did it, better execution, better story, bigger vision, and 18 months on, we're in a very strong position.
I'd like to end on that point. I know it's hot out there, everyone's tired, but please give Tom a big round.